It is fantastic to see you lovely folks here. It's fantastic. The weird thing about 2020 has been, Nicola, you've got fantastically long hair. Everyone looks a little bit different. And although we're all much more separated, we're also much more close. We can see, the plants in the back of Veronika's place. You can see my poor neglected dollhouse. And an IKEA lamp that's been destroyed by the children. Okay, so what we're here to talk about is galvanizing comics. And so what I'd love to do is I'd love to get each of you guys to introduce yourselves in a moment. But before we do that, just think about galvanizing. I think it's a tremendous way of kicking off this discussion because galvanizing has two real simple, but I think very appropriate definitions. One, it's giving a bit of a jolt of electric energy, energizing someone to do something, galvanizing. And on the other side of it, in technical terms, it's coating something with zinc, giving it a protective covering. So when you think about galvanizing comics, it's interesting to think both about energizing, exciting both creators and audiences, and also protecting and kind of girding for battle, an industry that we all are passionate about that maybe needs a little bit of support and work. So that's if you're going to think about anything, let's maybe frame our conversation in that. So let us. I'll introduce myself quickly. My name is Nye Wright. Nye is a nickname for Aneurin. I'm a Myriad author from back in the day. But I'm your host here. I would love to have each of you guys introduce yourselves. And as we said previously, we're going to start in first name alphabetical order. So Andy Oliver, who are you and what do you do in the world of comics?
Okay, well, I'm the editor-in-chief of Broken Frontier, which is a comics culture site running reviews, features, interviews. Our coverage is more in the line of the sort of indie alt comics and small press side of the comics scene. So we also kind of exist to champion emerging voices and bring them to a wider audience at Broken Frontier, and that's very much at the forefront of what we do. We try as well to be very active within our comics community, in the wider community outside of the actual site. So we host events with people like Gosh, we host a drink and draw, we take part in festivals, we're a media partner for LCAF. We run communal tables events so that creators can get an opportunity to sell their comics through communal tables. And we've published a number of books as well, featuring some of the creators that we've championed over the years. And we've had a little bit of success, I think, in bringing some of those artists to the attention of publishers. So that's very much our kind of mission as a sort of comics commentary site. And I sort of oversee a fantastic team of 12 people.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Andy. And having been an attendee of a drink and draw, and also just having met you back in the day, and seeing you both flying the flag for the small press, and also, being a kind of dyed-in-the-wool. I mean, your T-shirt says it as well. Being a dyed-in-the-wool classic comics guy as well. It's great to see you embracing everything and helping to lift the British comics community. So, welcome, Andy. Thank you. Con, I met you back in the day. You were training, living and working and making tons of comics down in Brighton. But for everyone listening today, who are you and what's your role in the comics scene these days?
Right, yeah, I used to live in Brighton back in the day, back in the early 2010s, I suppose. But I'll get to that. So I'm a Greek-Australian artist. I began self-publishing in Australia in the 90s, and I then moved to Athens, Greece, and from the early noughties to kind of throughout that decade, I suppose, I was self-publishing and made a name for myself, self-publishing a personal anthology, and then I kind of broke into the mainstream, which was breaking out at the same time in Greece. And so my self-published work got me noticed from the mainstream press, and I worked quite a bit there. And then the kind of economic crash happened, and I moved to the UK just as I was making a name for myself in Greece. And I went from kind of hero to zero. And the first thing I kind of did was take part in the Myriad editions competition. And I could get into that in a bit. So I'd made a name for myself, but I hadn't published a graphic novel until that point. And that was my graphic novel, my first kind of full-length graphic novel submission for my comic Dryland. And then what happened was from the 2010s onwards, webcomics started growing quite a bit. And and into a separate kind of form of the medium. And I began publishing all my comics in webcomic form. And I did a long form biography of the Smiths called Tales of the Smiths, which was a 450-page biography. I did that every day for 3 years as a webcomic. And that got published by Omnibus in 2018. And now for the past 3 years, I've been working on Rebel Rebel, the graphic biography of David Bowie. I'm 300 webcomic episodes in, and I've only reached 1967, so it's going to be a quite lengthy feat. And now for the past 3 years also I've been teaching full-time on the BA Comics and Graphic Novels course at Teesside University and the MA course.
Amazing. So a man of many talents. I will come back to using a silent medium to depict musicians. I love it. But we'll come to that in a moment. Corinne Pearlman, although technically you're listed as Candida Lacey, but do you mind introducing yourself? I know everyone listening will know who you are, but maybe a brief introduction if that's okay.
It will be very brief. I'm Corinne Pearlman. I'm creative director at Myriad Editions, and I'm responsible for the graphic novel list that we publish alongside our topical atlases and also our feminist non-fiction and literary fiction series. And I'm an erstwhile cartoonist. And I also have a hand in the first graphic novel competition. I'm been a judge each year. This is something that Myriad started in 2012. We've had 4 competitions so far. And that is partly the reason why this group is together, because we have, apart from our lovely chairman, we've either been competition winners or shortlisters or judges. Thank you.
Wonderful, thank you, Corinne. So let's move on down the list here to Gareth Brookes, Mr. Brookes, the first winner of the Myriad First Graphic Novel Competition. Who are you, and what's your role in the British comic scene?
So I make comics, small press comics, and 2 graphic novels. The first one won the first graphic novel competition, the Black Project. My second book was 1,000 Colour Castles. I guess I'm probably best known for using unusual materials in my work, embroidery, lino cut, crayons, things like that. I've got a new graphic novel coming out next May with Self-Made Hero called The Dancing Plague. And that's all made using embroidery and pyrography, which means a soldering iron on textile material. I've just started a PhD in comics, which I suppose makes me an academic now as well. So, yeah.
Amazing. And let's not forget you're an accomplished poet.
Oh yeah, I used to do the £1 poet. I'm a real Renaissance man. I am, yeah. I forgot.
Great. Thank you, Gareth. And moving our way down the list alphabetically, Jenny. Jenny, who are you, and what's your role in the UK comic scene?
So my name is Jenny Robbins. My first graphic novel, Biscuits, Assorted, came out last month from Myriad Editions, and previously won the 2018 First Graphic Novel Competition. It's an ensemble book that tells the stories of a few different women living in London over the course of one summer. Although it started with a project that was kind of all about how we are all individuals and you shouldn't judge us by our labels, it turned into something that's much more about friendships and relationships and what we mean to each other. I have it here, I hope that's not too cheeky. It also has really detailed drawings of London and quite a lot of jokes, some of them about poo and sex. I'm also an illustrator and a teacher. I sometimes write about comics for Broken Frontier with Andy and The Quietus. I've been a part of the UK comic scene since around 2013, and I've had short stories in anthologies like Solipsistic Pop, Dirty Rotten Comics, and Meanwhile, ...
Fantastic. That's great. I was having a look through your Instagram feed a couple of days ago, and there's some fantastic images of cookie cutters, where it'd be very easy to stick people into kind of pinhole images of who we think they are, and then your characters are emerging out of the cookie cutters to show us who they really are. They're really fantastic. So I'd recommend everyone check her out. Yeah, absolutely. Okay, great. Let's work our way down. Dr. Nicola Streeten.
I just added that doctor as Gareth was saying he's starting his PhD, just to keep one step ahead, Gareth. So I'm Nicola Streeten, and I'm proud to have been the third graphic novel published by Myriad Editions, and was also enjoyed being one of the judges one year. And I'm a graphic novelist and comics scholar. So I've done my PhD. My area is feminism and British women's cartoons and comics. And I guess I'm perhaps also best known as director of what is now called LDComics, which is a women-led forum for supporting graphic novel works and comics. And we've been running since 2008, and it's always focused very much on creating a social atmosphere, and it's relied heavily on being physical, the physical interaction. But we've taken the leap in October to embrace the online, and we've always had monthly meetings, physical meetings, and we had our first online one in October. And it seems, so I'm interested in this galvanizing idea, and we'll talk more, because it seems to be needed for us as the organizers and also for our community.
That's great. So my only question is, how has 2020 defeated Ladies Do Comic and Cake?
Oh, I know.
What's happened to LDC
We're
Cake?
really thin, all of us. And can I just add, this hair has been a project pre-COVID. Don't think it's just because I've let myself go. I've been working on it.
Wonderful. Well, and having attended, so Ladies Do Comics, the previous iterations before 2020 of the meetups were fantastic, because great speakers, men and women, people across the spectrum of creators, but also fantastic cake.
Yeah, and just to add, we also, we've run 2 years of prizes, 3 years maybe of women only prizes. So complementing rather than rivaling the Myriad prize. There is an overlap. Jenny was shortlisted. Oh, longlisted. But I think it just adds to the general, status and getting your work seen as an entrant. And also we're now running online mentoring and a residency we're going to launch online in January.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Streeten. Next on the list, let's go to Veronika. Veronika, who are you in the, introduce us to you, and what kind of role do you play in the British comic scene?
Hi, nice to meet you all. So yeah, I'm Veronika, and I do comics for not too long now, I'd say. So I think I've been making comics for about 3 years. And so far I've been mainly adding to like anthologies with short stories, and now I'm very excited about having won Myriad first graphic novel competition this year. Yeah, so I'm working on my first book, which is quite exciting. And I think one sort of common denominator all my comics or previous works share with the one I'm working on now as well is exploring solitude. And I think especially through the digital age that we live in, which I think especially this year's kind of turned it around even more in a way for me. So even to have you all in my kitchen right now through this kind of screen is a bit surreal. So yeah, that's it, I think. Yeah.
Wonderful. And Veronika, for everyone listening, what's the name of this wonderful book that's just won the Myriad First Graphic Novel Competition?
It's called Cyberman.
Excellent. Well, and then last but not least, Woodrow Phoenix. Who are you, and what role do you play in the British comic scene?
I write things and draw things, like everyone here, and design things, do a lot of book design. I have the signal honour of being the first person to do a graphic novel with Myriad, which was this one. Although, of course, it's not actually a graphic novel. It's more of a graphic investigation, I would say, really. But yeah, so that was the first comics that Myriad published way back when. And that was because they did an anthology called The Brighton Book. And The Brighton Book was just stories about Brighton. And originally they asked me to do an illustration for it. And I was like, well, I'd rather do a story. So Corinne said, well, yeah, okay, you can do that. So I did a story about why Brighton was such a weird place and why it attracted nutcases. and everyone liked it. So then they said, why don't you do a book? And Rumbleship was the result. Yeah, so I've been doing comics for a long time, and I do all kinds of comics. I do stuff for adults, I do stuff for children, I do things that are quite narratively drawn, things that are quite experimental, and I like to do that. And I also do lots of design as well. I do lots of book design, and I've designed a few books for Myriad, including this one, which was very fun to do. And this is embossed here and debossed, which I always like to have little bits of funny stuff. And I really like designing illustrated books because I like to see how you can change the way things feel by how you lay them out. And yeah, that's me.
Wonderful. Thank you, Woodrow. So as we, Corinne, yes, please. I think you're on mute.
Woodrow to say his kind of role on the Society of Authors.
Oh yeah, that's true. Yes, I am now on the board of the Society of Authors, representing all illustrators, because the Society of Authors, as you would expect, is lots of novelists and people like that. And recently, I guess in the last couple of years, it's been more apparent that there needs to be just more input from other areas of the publishing industry. So I got involved because, obviously, being a graphic designer and a comic artist, I could talk about all the stuff that all the other authors aren't really aware of. And that's proven to be a pretty useful thing recently, which we might get into later. And also, I was a judge on the Graphic Novel Prize for Myriad. This was it the second one or the third one? Third one, I think.
No, 2014, I think.
Yeah. Is that a third one?
Second.
Okay.
Right. Well, that's actually a perfect segue. So thank you very much, everyone, for introducing yourselves. That's a perfect segue into talking about competitions. Now, on the one side, I think everyone's engaged in storytelling and art and bringing those things to the world. So what in the world does competition have to do with art? On the other side of things, how is it that perhaps, all of you guys have participated, whether Corinne as both an adjudicator and a sponsor of the contest, people who've also judged, Nicola, and for several of you who've competed, been shortlisted, been longlisted, competition is a really interesting thing. So what I guess I'd first like to ask is, what value is there in in hosting a competition, participating in a competition, and how does that help the wider mission of getting comics a greater readership? So maybe I'll start with the most recent participant and winner. So with you, Veronika, what are your thoughts, having recently just gone through this process? What are the values of it, and maybe what are the challenges of it?
The challenge. Should I maybe start with the challenges?
Sure, please.
So, I think it's yeah, definitely is quite challenging in some ways, because there's a big build up to it, but at the same time I think it's quite exciting to have the opportunity, since I guess publishers get so many submissions, just to know that there's a jury really engaging with your submission and taking the time to study it in some ways.
And do you think, thinking about preparing your submission for judges to view it, did that change your way of producing it? Did that change your thinking of how you made your art?
I have to confess that it was a very last minute submission, the one I entered. I think because actually my book Cyberman, I put it aside for a while. So I started working on it 3 or 4 years ago. And I've sent it out to publishers and haven't heard back. So I kind of set the project aside. And then a friend of mine, he came to the cafe I worked and said, "Oh, did you hear that the deadline for the Myriad competition is tomorrow? Are you gonna enter it?" And then I went home and I saw that I had a spare black and white copy lying around. So I just shipped it off. So it was a really lucky chance, really, that I took, I think.
That's amazing. And just for everyone else, what's fantastic about Cyberman is well, do you mind giving everyone maybe a 2-line description of what this book is about, as we're looking towards seeing it in the next year or two?
Yeah, so it's non-fictional, the book, and it sort of documents the process of documenting someone's online stream. So I stumbled across this man in Finland who has a 24/7 live stream where he broadcasts really just like his life and him sitting in front of his computer. So I think what I found quite fascinating about it is its minimalism, or his minimalism, because he's not trying to put on a show for his viewers, but it's rather very unadulterated and very raw in a way. And I thought, yeah, I think one thing that I found quite interesting about it as well is the reflection of yourself when you watch it. So I don't appear visually in the book, apart from one exception, but it's mainly, but I watch him through my lens. So it kind of, I felt quite exposed watching someone so intimately. So I think that's in a nutshell what the whole book is about.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Veronika. And for everyone else, what's fascinating about it, it's a digital subject, but it's covered in analog materials, beautiful painted analog materials, and it feels very much like an analog artifact. So I'm super excited to see this book. Maybe Con, could I go over to you? Having participated in the first graphic novel competition and then gone on to literally produce stacks of comics. So although you didn't win, what was it? What did the experience of the contest do for you in your comics production? Did it boost it? Was it a non-entity? Like what role did it play for you in your comics production?
I mean, just setting a kind of deadline and a milestone, a specific page count, is what really motivates young artists. And in my case, I think, and in my case, it really helped me produce those 20 pages or so that I submitted for that first competition. I was kind of already researching the topic because it dealt with the deaths of my ancestors in pre-war Greece, in interwar Greece, and so I was already researching the project, and I just needed some motivation to get it going. And yeah, what really helped, to be fair, this is what's strange, and because Veronika mentioned that one day before the deadline coincidence, I just moved to Brighton, and I visited Dave's Comics for the first time, and just before the deadline, again in my case, I saw a little flyer stuck on the window of Dave's Comics, and it was that flyer that notified me of the competition. And it's strange that I've heard from other people taking part in the competition that it's these little kind of word of mouth and little flyer, old school types of communication that got the word out to comics artists. And yes, comics shops got the word out to me. These things actually still operate on a successful level.
Fantastic, thank you, Con. And maybe so I'd like to go over to Gareth. Gareth, having won the first graphic novel competition, and now going on to we're going to see the publication of your third graphic novel. What did the competition, and what do you think competition does in general to either help to help motivate an artist to get their work and kind of start a career?
I think it makes you take yourself seriously if you do well, you get shortlisted or longlisted. I think it's kind of something that's going to be there every so often, every year, every 2 years to work towards. So if there's someone new in the comic scene, you can tell them, send your work off here. And even if you don't win, it's a really good bit of practice for sending your work off to publishers, and applying for things. I remember, I heard about it. I was very similar. It was a real last minute thing, but I think Woodrow was talking at Ladies Do Comics, and he mentioned the graphic novel competition. But I wasn't there. I think Jimmy Gherkin told me about it. So it was like this kind of chain of 3 people. Nicola had to put on Ladies Do Comics, then Woodrow had to speak about it, and then Jimmy Gherkin had to tell me about it. So there's the community's kind of telling everybody about these opportunities, and it kind of like brings everyone into it, and it makes it a kind of it's an event every year. The same with the ladies prize, and and, you know, a couple of other competitions. It's always, there's always something that you can like, aim towards. And when I started as well, like when I was quite early on, there wasn't any publishers really doing graphic novels. I mean, there was Jonathan Cape, but really they were mainly doing overseas editions. So kind of just having people that are willing to publish your work just kind of made the whole community begin to see itself just as not as a bit of a, you know, fun putting out small press comics, which is valuable as well, but, you know, it's something that you can have a book in a shop with a barcode and all that kind of thing. So yeah, I think that's what's really important.
So it's amazing, the validating power of both winning a contest and getting a barcode.
Barcode, yeah.
It's all about barcodes. Thank you, Gareth. So I'd like to switch. So you mentioned Ladies Do Comics. Nicola, what I'd love to hear from you is having, you're both a comics scholar, a comics creator, but in this case, both for the Ladies Prize and for the Myriad First Graphic Novel Competition, you've been an adjudicator. What's it like to go through this work, knowing that selection can help elevate and propel a career, and maybe, you know, making it into the no pile can have a different impact on people? What's that been like for you, being both a creator and a judge?
Well, when we set up, can I just answer like a completely different question now?
Please.
Or just like him. But when we set up the prize, I was resistant because, you know, there's already, because of that thing of there's always a winner. And so by the second year, we, part of the criteria of entry, it is women only, but part of the criteria is entries have to send a printed version of their 12 pages. And we have a 2-day festival in London at the Free Word Centre, and all the entries are displayed. And we couldn't have it physically this year, but we'll run it in the summer next year at the Free Word. And what we did for the last year was we invited publishers to speak as well and have stalls. So the whole idea is about, it's actually a process of networking. It's exactly as Gareth says, and what Andy was saying earlier, it's about putting people in contact with each other. And the hugest, there's 3 really great things that have come out of the process, which is our winner this year, Rima Sabina Auf for Hugo. She was longlisted in 2018, and so she's been developing her work, and she won our 2020 prize. And also our winner, for Emma Burley of the first year, she's part of our committee now, so we've brought her into our number of 6 there are running it. And at the festival last year, 2019, she was chatting, because Liminal 11 is a fairly new publisher run by Mike Medaglia and co, and she was chatting to him, and from that got a publishing contract, not for her graphic memoir, but for a work about watercolor and wellness, and creativity. So and also from the 2 physical festivals that we've had in London, there's been 2 clumps of shortlisted artists who've continued a sort of critical feedback group between them, continuing to spur each other on to continue their work. So it's that kind of, they wouldn't have met if there hadn't been the festival, if they hadn't entered, and it's that sort of thing. And Jenny has been a regular appearance, you know, one of our team really, Jenny, at the festivals and also at Ladies Do Comics, absolutely essential for getting us to do things on time and stuff, so organized, and as well a long list in the first year. So that's, and I think part of that is developing people's work, so it's supportive, it's that kind of professional development, skills, qualities, how to present yourself, and introductions, you know, that's a huge part of it.
So the competition itself is a galvanizing force to get people to produce work, to learn about the industry, to get to know people. Yeah. Yeah,
and also what we've started, and what's amazingly, because of lockdown, this online mentoring has been really great. So we've got a bank of mentors who are, and they're women, we're inviting to be mentors, and I've been mentoring myself so we offer it to the public, to anybody. But what's been great is for ourselves as creators, we're realizing it's making us reflect on how we work, and when we're giving advice that we obviously don't follow, it makes us think about the process. So that's been quite, so it's professional development at all levels, at the entry level and also higher up amongst published
Right.
graphic novelists.
Thank you, Nicola. So maybe I'd love to go over to another adjudicator, Mr. Oliver. So for you, you're adjudicating every day, because I following you on social media and hearing the travails of maybe people wanting to get an Andy Oliver blurb, people wanting to get a review, so that you're doing a bit of curation and adjudication with that every single day, and then being connected to Corinne and the team and being brought in for the Myriad competition and others. What's that like? What's it like as a journalist and as a judge to need to kind of sift through and make decisions, knowing that the impact that can have both on individual creators and on the industry?
Yeah, it's funny, you live with this sort of constant burden of guilt about all the stuff that you can't. It's as you can imagine, the requests for coverage are pretty much relentless, and we do have our specific area as well. We're far more interested in work that is really challenging what the form can do. So a lot of the people perhaps working in more sort of genre-based comics, it's harder for them to get coverage from us. But again, there's other people that will do that for them anyway. But yeah, that whole feeling of guilt is just, it's non-stop, because it's incredibly difficult every single week to curate a smaller list of the review opportunities that we get, to pass those on to the team, to prioritise the things that we want to prioritise. And I think for a lot of the creators, just even getting onto our sort of our weekly mail outs, even if they don't get a review, and they're never aware of this, but that in itself is quite an achievement, because the small press scene is immense now. And there are so many people. I mean, you just have to look at the virtual halls at Thought Bubble to realise how many people there are out there looking for reviews and looking for coverage. And I think the same with the Judging the Myriad competition. Again, the particular pressure really was on that last meeting that we did, where we were sort of talking about the shortlist. And just that whole realisation that there's one person here that's going to get something out of this. There's 5 people here whose work is fantastic, but might not get something out of it. Never ever underestimate the sort of the responsibility I think that anybody working in reviewing or judging will ultimately feel about making these decisions. And anybody who is disappointed, keep plugging away and keep sending us review requests, because sometimes it can take, it can take 3 or 4 attempts sometimes, but we do get to people sometimes after they've submitted quite a few comics to us, so it's never a dead end.
That's great. Thank you, Andy. So maybe, Corinne, going over to you, so we've heard a lot about the experience, both of people who've entered, of judges, of the potential connecting ability. What was the thinking behind doing the first graphic novel competition back in 2012, and how do you think it's evolved over the last several years?
Yeah, I just saw Con has his hand raised in the corner, so.
That's right. It's just something that I omitted to mention before, is that I had the industry-related modules at Teesside University's comics course, and for the 3rd years, we've got a module that's purely based on competitions, and Myriad plays a massive role there. And I try to convince the students to use that deadline, that milestone, to get their first comics out there. And I think I've convinced quite a few, actually. But I think it's a massive opportunity in terms of receiving constructive feedback from the industry, not just from a tutor. Because a lot of the times they just see me as a tutor, not just someone that works in comics. And also, it's a great opportunity to network with like-minded people. I mean, I've met loads of people through the competition. That's it.
Yeah.
That's great. And thank you, Corinne, for pointing out the digital hand. I've now got the window in the right place. So if anyone, you can also raise your IRL, your in real life hand, if you want to as well. So yeah, Corinne, over to you.
Yeah, you would. I think the kind of the main, the impetus for doing a first graphic novel competition was that Myriad was already doing first drafts, writing competition, which was looking for debut novelists, you know, non-fiction writers, but that had not been published, and this had been very successful. And so we thought we would do the same for graphic novels. Also, very much part of that, and it's always been Myriad's remit to try and get bring awareness for the graphic novel form, because it's, you know, this is still sort of my kind of main motive for doing it anyway, because competitions do get noticed, and you know, I think that it's very easy for all of us in our world, and you know, some of us know each other very well, and we are very supportive of one another. But I think there is now a kind of a real recognition that the comics form is part, you know, needs to be sort of part of our wider kind of cultural landscape and so on, and whatever we can do to make people aware of that, the better. So I think that kind of competitions are, if you like, kind of quite a media friendly way of doing that. I mean, people, you know, there's so I mean, I appreciate what everyone is saying about, you know, it's nice when there are no winners and so on. I think there's a lot of argument for that. But equally, kind of the main stories, it helps to raise awareness of the form, and also it's still the case that there just aren't enough publishers publishing comics, and there aren't enough journalists writing about comics. So, you know, if one has a role in anything to do with promoting comics, then do it. I mean, you know, I'd love to see Andy Oliver with his, you know, a weekly column in a mainstream newspaper. And I'm, you know, there's so many other great writers and bloggers and so on. So it's all to do with pushing our efforts into different areas. There's nothing wrong with what we're doing. It's great. It just, we want to kind of do it everywhere. You know?
Yeah,
So
that's great.
That's why we continue to do it, you know. And of course, it's a great way of finding people's work. It comes to you, and not, you know, from the artists themselves.
Yeah, and at this point, what's the count of winners and shortlisters that you guys have published at this point? It's pretty. I think isn't it eight books at this point? Gareth's 2, Ian's 2, Hannah's 2, Veronika, Jenny, Jade. Actually, is that 10? So I mean, that's a ton of books to come out of 3 competitions, correct?
Yeah,
and now 4.
Because the quality is so high. I think kind of every shortlist we could have published all of them. You know, don't think there was anything. And all the thing is that it's for a work in progress, and all of them have that development. But
great. Well, thank you, Corinne. So I'd love to go to you, Jenny. Now, Jenny, you sit at this really interesting nexus right now because you've literally just been published. You went through the competition 2 years ago. You obviously went through the period of leading up to that. And it sounds like through your affiliation with Ladies Do Comics, you're also involved in some of this kind of networking and administrative work. So can you just talk a little bit about your experience there of having been a competitor, having won and gotten published, and then also this work you've had on the side of kind of working within the kind of wider culture of comics in the UK?
Yeah, well, it was interesting for me to hear how everyone else heard about the comic competition at last minute. I'd known about it for a considerable amount of time before that, through going to lots of different things. So I went to a Guardian graphic novel writing masterclass in 2013, at which Paul Gravett spoke about the importance of getting into the community and networking and meeting people, and that was just the best way. So I took him at his word and I started going to things. I started going to the Comica meetups that used to happen in the, what's called on the South Bank, big building, the Royal Festival Hall. And I started going to LDC, Ladies Do Comics, and Drink and Draw, that Broken Frontier run, and it's just such a fantastic community. So many people supporting each other and telling each other about things. I think it was probably the second LDC event that I went to when it was at the House of Illustration. I went to the pub afterwards and I met I think that was the first time I met Corinne, although I think the next time I saw her, she thought I was someone else, which is quite funny. But that was also the time that Jules Scheel of One Beat Zines was speaking, and I approached them, and I got them to publish a mini collection of my zines that I had at the time, which are like little books with illustrations in. And for that, I did a poster design that was the origin of the idea that turned into Biscuits. So if I hadn't gone to LDComics, the project wouldn't have even started. What was the rest of the question?
Well, and how does it feel now that you're 1 month away? We're 1 month past your publication date, right? Your book is out there in the real world. It's a thing you can hold and smell and flip through. What does that feel like?
Smells good. Yeah, it feels really good. I mean, obviously, I'm going through it in quite exceptional circumstances, what with the pandemic, and it's hard for me to judge what might have been different, what might have been, in some ways, probably better, because as Veronika said, we've got these new channels of communication, and you can do a talk and hundreds and hundreds of people can attend, instead of just who can get into central London at 6 p.m. on a Friday and fit into a small space and eat some cake. Or and it's been lovely to have my book out there and have people responding to it. I think as Gareth said, something like this is so incredibly validating. So winning in the first place and then getting to work with the brilliant people at Myriad to develop the project makes you feel, yeah, like I can do this. This is something that I could actually do with my life. And then when it's out in the world, getting responses not just from your friends that you know have to be nice to you, but from strangers as well, is really great.
Yeah, getting validation from people who have no vested interest in making you feel good is an incredible thing. Although getting validation from the people you love is also crucially important. Amazing. So I'd love to go over to Woodrow. Now, Woodrow, I'd love to plant a seed as we get toward the end here, real quick. I want everyone to think about what's the one thing you think needs to happen to galvanize British comics. And the reason I'm going to you, Woodrow, is I think you personally are a galvanic figure. I think of Rumble Strip, no people, no characters, just landscapes, but it's this incredible book telling this incredible, not story, but I think of it like a polemic against driving. And it's an incredible thing, gets people to think differently. She Lives, a graphic novel. I had an image in the slides I was going to show, you know, a graphic novel that's big. I'm 6 feet tall and I think it's bigger than me.
It is.
You know, so you don't tilt at small windmills, you go for big ones. So what is it, you know, what is it that you think competition does about galvanizing British comics, and what do you think we or the industry needs to do to galvanize British comics as we go forward?
Well, I think generally the biggest issue, I think, for all of us as creators is to make things that are relevant to a readership. And rightly or wrongly, people tend to think of comics as only being good at doing things that are fantasy related and unreal things, you know, so it's superheroes, it's comedy, it's fantasy, it's jokes, it's stuff that isn't based on real life, because since, you know, you can draw anything in a comic, you can draw fantastic things, and it's really good for that. So people tend to kind of forget that there's a whole world of like real subjects out there that we can also tackle. And I think one way to expand our readership is to start talking about things that people who don't understand fantasy or don't like it are interested in too. So Rumble Strip for me was an obvious thing to do, because it was something I'd been thinking about for a long time, and I hadn't really thought that I could do a comic about that, just because, you know, people don't do those kinds of comics. But then talking to Corinne about, you know, ideas for things to write about, and she was like, well, you know, this is something we could talk about. I mean, it was in fact the easier thing. I had a couple of other subjects as well that were even more challenging than that. And we decided on Rumble Strip as probably the most accessible thing we could talk about. Strangely enough, they were all to do with death in one way or another, because what's the most important and least, you know, trivial thing to talk about? You know, we're all affected by these things. So yeah, in terms of comics as a medium, I think the way we're going to expand, if we can, is to talk about things that other people want to talk about, and we need to expand our ambitions as well and do more different kinds of things. So the idea behind She Lives was just that because silent comics are an area that I was investigating as well, because people find it very hard to read comics. And I was thinking, if you make it as easy as possible, then that's another way to get more people reading. And but there was always a challenge there, because people don't know how to read silent comics either. They don't, because without words, they don't know how long to look at something for. Or so I figured if it made the images really, really big, then that would be a very obvious way to make people read something, to direct their attention. So that was the idea of that. So I think we have to keep trying different ideas and looking at different things, and not discounting something just because it's initially strange or odd, because there could be something there that can be applicable. And as far as competitions go, I think it's really important for us all to have things to work towards, because we're all working kind of by ourselves in our rooms and things. And it's quite easy to get very disconnected, because comics is a very solo activity. It's very intense. It's very time consuming. It's very difficult to do. And you do it alone, and it's very easy to just lose sight of everything else and feel like you're just, alone doing this weird thing. And if you have some goals and some targets, then suddenly that becomes much more of a shared, much more of a interestingly combined activity. So competitions are really good for giving people something to work towards, and also to just pull people in, I think. And also, when you're making something, if you have a target, then that makes it feel more real, and you're more likely to take it more seriously, and you're going to finish things. I think it's so important to go back to all the time this idea that a thing isn't real until it's finished. People give up on things a lot, when they get to a tough point, because they think, oh, I'll just do the next thing. But it's like, no, you have to do this thing, you've got to take it all the way to the end, finish it, and then you can evaluate it, And when you have something to work towards like that, when you know that people are going to look at it, editors are going to look at it. Corinne is brilliant in many ways, but one particular thing she's brilliant at is analysing a piece of work and telling you, how it's working, what's not working. I mean, on Rumble Strip, a lot of the time, I wasn't really sure about what I was doing at all, and I wasn't really sure if things are working or not. And I would disagree with Corinne. She would say, you shouldn't do that. And I said, well, I want to do that. And she'd say, no, then that doesn't really work there. And I would have to trust her, because, I couldn't get perspective on this thing. And it turned out to be obviously the right thing to do, because if you have somebody you trust who can give you advice that you can't really see, then your work is always going to be stronger for it, because we're working to make things for people. This isn't something we're doing for ourselves. We're communicating, we're making narratives that are going to be consumed. So we have to be aware of how people receive what we make. And that's another really strong thing about working with publishers, working with competition, is that whatever you make is not going to be in isolation. It's going to be part of something. It's going to be evaluated. It's going to make a difference to the people that are reading it.
Great. Well, so that's fantastic. So three things from Woodrow Phoenix that we can do to galvanize comics generally, but particularly British comics, is think about the stories that we're telling, not just men in tights and knights on horses and jokes and poop jokes and things like that. There's more stories to be told. I think that's great. Think about legibility. Comics, some people think that it's a little bit difficult to read, so making sure that we're focusing on legibility. And then third, getting other eyes on them, right? So thank you, Woodrow. So let's go maybe over Andy. Andy, what do you think? Lightning round, galvanizing British comics, what do we need to do?
Well, we have a little tagline called Exploring the Comics Universe that sits at the top of the Broken Frontier site. I think some of you may remember I had a hashtag called Comics Hub in those wonderful pre-COVID days. It always amazed people who would, like bar staff and people in the pub, that comics could be graphic biography, they could be graphic memoir, they could be graphic medicine, graphic poetry. And I think, coming back to what Woodrow was saying there, so many people aren't aware of all the things that comics can be. They are still seeing them in very much that kind of what we call the mainstream, which in any other area would be a niche of superheroes. But it's getting that message out, and that's what we intend to keep doing at BF, at Broken Frontier. Just to really reinforce that idea that comics can be whatever we want them to be, and anybody can be a comics reader. They're not a juvenile art form. There's something there for every single reader out there in terms of subject and theme. And we'll just keep on pushing that, I hope.
Fantastic. And for anyone who hasn't been to brokenfrontier.com, definitely check it out because there's something for everyone there. Thank you, Andy. Dr. Streeten, what do you think, having, you know, explored a doctorate in, you know, the power of comics in academia, what do you think we need to do to galvanize comics in England and more broadly?
So I have 3 points as well. My personal, for galvanizing, my personal wish, which might have to be a 10-year plan, is to give our community a home, like a physical home. And I mean, I don't just mean a museum, I mean a community home, which is holistic. So that's one wish, dream. The second one, I think it's important for us here to train the trainers. So it's not just all on Andy feeling guilty, but it's his team and he's bringing up a team. And I know you are doing that, Andy. And the same with, it's not just Corinne that is the only editor with those skills, but training people up. And the third thing is continue to explore the online possibilities, because when we do go back to the physical, I think it's picking up on what Jenny said, our biggest expense for Ladies Do Comics is venue hire. That's going back to the also having to find our own home, but also no one from it's very London centric, it still is, no matter what we say, and the South centric. And I think online has been amazing for bringing people around the world, and also bringing our, you know, our followers from the north of England being able to afford to click into online meetings and share their work themselves. So it's not going to go away. I think we need to find ways to expand it further.
So a physical home.
Yeah.
If anyone's ever been to, for people listening, if you haven't been to Angoulême, it's you'll hear comics creators talking about it.
No, sorry to interrupt. I was thinking more of the Cartoon Centre in Vermont. That, or more
cool.
like,
yeah.
What was it called in Carolina? The sorry. Well, okay, it'll come to me and I'll shout.
That's all right.
But more of
you're talking about community, so yeah. places what we're used to is maybe museums where people can just look at stuff, but you're talking about community interactions, places for education.
So that you host residencies on an ongoing way. There's a few models around the country within fine arts. And
do you like the House of Illustration?
Well, that doesn't, you can't have a meal there, you can't stay there, you can't meet with 8 other people and live there. You can't have a studio there. So it's like a slightly bigger a destination that offers multiple opportunities.
Great. So destinations, training the trainers, and physical locations for us to get together.
And online. And
online.
Yeah.
Cool. Wonderful. Maybe Con, Jenny, let's go to you.
I just want to say that, building a bit on what Woodrow said, and some really good points that were made during the UK Comics survey meetings by Alex Norris, like the literacy that's out there in the community for people that don't know that what comics is capable of, but do read comics in other forms, like they read their Instagram feeds, and that's pictures and words together in sequence. And a lot of people that read manga but have never read other forms of comics. And I think it's really important to think about meeting people where they're at. So trying to create content that builds on that literacy that they have, rather than trying to convince them to read comics the way that we read comics that grew up with comics.
I think that's a fantastic, I mean, the graphic literacy is perhaps more important now than it's ever been, and it's more in use, you know, that you can have an entire news site like BuzzFeed, which was formed on listicles, not articles, but listicles, right? And then graphic feeds in that. And I think thinking about an Instagram feed as a sequential feed, I think is fantastic. That's a great idea, Jenny. Meaning,
but actually, one thing,
go for it, Woodrow.
Jumping in about training trainers, because anyone who's been making comics for a while finds themselves often in this position where they know more about what they're doing than their editors do, because most editors are not comics literate. You know, they come to it from a second place or a third place, and they might be okay with scripts, but they don't understand visual stuff at all. So one thing that the UK comics industry needs is editors who understand the medium and can actually, you know, give feedback in a way that is useful to artists as well as to writers, because you see, looking at a lot of the stuff that comes out now, that okay, the writing might be pretty good, but the kind of visual level of things is pretty basic, because artists aren't getting the kind of feedback that they need to help them make more sophisticated work. So that's important too.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. Con, as a dedicated, very busy educator, what do you think we need to do to galvanize the British comics scene, or comics just in general?
Well, I mean, receiving formal education really helps. I can see it in the case of my own students, from seeing their journey from entering the course from year one to them graduating. You can definitely see that it really helps. And well, that's one thing. On the other hand, I think that we also play we ourselves can play a role in galvanizing the scene by championing comics and supporting new comics on a more kind of active level. That means, did I read a comic and liked it, or even merely liked it? Can I say something about it online if it's an indie comic or an alternative comic? It will really help that creator. My own comics, half the time, most of my comics actually at the moment are on Patreon and supported through Patreon. And the more kind of publicity I get for them through social media, the more it will help get more comics out. And a lot of new creators depends a lot on crowdfunding. So, if we could just get on a micro level people's work out there, and not stay silent on what we enjoy, then I think we could really, really help the scene. I talk to a lot of people who enjoy a lot of webcomics, who enjoy a lot of comics, and they post nonsensical stuff once a month on their social media or on an everyday level, and they never post comics that they enjoy. I mean, even if you do that on a tiny level, it will really, really help. Great.
So educating practitioners, and then getting more content out there for people to enjoy and comment on, and kind of build some audiences with, right?
Definitely.
Amazing. Gareth, you're thinking about you are also a galvanic figure in that you've chosen to use media that no one's ever done for comics. I mean, one of my favorite zines of yours is the embroidered nudes with personal text messages between people in kind of trysts. So it's a very Veronika, very analog take on a very digital experience. What do you think we need to do to galvanize comics? More embroidery and more pyrography?
Well, I mean, I think, at the risk of introducing a note of negativity, I think that I've kind of long since given up on the idea that there's going to be this moment when the British public at large suddenly get comics and everyone starts running out and buying graphic novels and things. And I think that we've kind of got our little scene has been quite sheltered from success. So you can do things like make crazy comics with embroidery and make, like have things that have no interest in any kind of commercial broader appeal, And I'm not saying that I've got no ambition for people to read my comics, but it's more experimental. And I think that what I have noticed is that people in other countries are paying more attention to our scene now. I heard about Veronika's work from Fantagraphics Now anthology before I heard about her work through Myriad thing, and that wouldn't have happened 10 years ago, I think. And I've noticed that people are getting more reviews in the Comics Journal. I've noticed more American followers and people buying my work in America and in Europe. So I think that that's actually really important. And for me, like in my development, getting to Angoulême was really hugely important, and seeing what's over there. And I think I would say to any young artist, go to Angoulême, go to TCAF if you can, go to those sorts of things and see what a proper comics industry looks like, and then like bring that knowledge back and work on our own comics. Because I think that, knowing the British, only when we have a world-beating comic scene, is everyone going to pay attention and, like get behind it, I think. But I think that like other countries are starting, there's more people selected for that Angoulême, more British. Joe Kessler won last year or the year before. So yeah, I think looking overseas, looking outwards is really important.
So I like what you said there. So two things: looking further afield for inspiration, but perhaps that we're sheltered from the bright light of success means we can tinker and play and just do fantastically weird things.
Because I think the French scene, I went to Angoulême and 2 years ago, and they've got a very narrow idea in some publishers of what a commercial book looks like, and we don't have that so much here. So I think it's we've got a special scene actually.
It is fantastic, and the work that, as an American, as a transplanted American, the work that I see and the community I'm able to participate in, I just feel very lucky for. Last two people, Veronika, you're new into this. You've just won the competition. Perhaps there's nothing you think we need to do to galvanize British comics, or maybe there is. I don't know. What are your thoughts? What are your thoughts looking forward to jumpstart things?
Yeah, I think probably I'm not the best person to ask in some ways, because actually I thought it was really interesting, Woodrow, the point you made when you said that when you were working on your book, you kind of had to remind yourself you're not doing it for yourself and in isolation, but for other people, because I think that's a process I'm in at the moment, really, because there is something inside me that kind of want to block that out, really, because I think to me it is a very personal process to make the comic, and I just hadn't had the experience of thinking about other people while making it, maybe. So yeah, I think that's my personal approach. And then I think with the UK comic scene, maybe because I'm from Austria and there really is not much at all of any comic scene. Like there's not even like an illustration course as such, which I think is what brought me to the UK. Maybe because I initially came here as an Erasmus student, and that was 7 years ago now. So I just stayed basically, and that was, I think, in comparison, I did feel like at least there is quite like a strong scene here, and that is very motivational for practitioners, I guess. So I feel
that's great. I think. Yeah, the comparison, grass being greener. We're talking about the things that we don't have, but I like, Gareth, what you're talking about is we have the ability to tinker and do strange things, and then the rest of the world sees them. We have the ability to look outside and see what we've got. And Veronika, a great reminder that there are no scenes in some places. So it's our job to tend this little garden.
Maybe I am not doing Austria justice by saying there's no scene, because there's, they are starting to do scene fairs as well, but in a very small scale compared to the UK, I would say.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to go last but not least to Corinne. So Corinne, having started having built this publishing house with its, literary fiction, illustrated atlases, and now graphic works, what do you think? You're already doing fantastic work to galvanize things as a major force for good in the UK comic scene, but what else do you think we need to do?
I think everybody in their own way has to be an ambassador for comics in whatever. So it's like what am I doing now? How can I expand on that with the wider world? And it's actually it is that sort of taking yourself seriously, which is as true for anyone who's established in their own medium, and actually thinking, I am doing this. I mean, for instance, in publishing itself, I sort of think it's my job to try and get comics into every kind of festival or anthology or anything else. I mean, there's still, and I go on trying to do that. Because looking right back at the Brighton book, which is actually the first book that Myriad published that included, photography, and was a really kind of multidisciplinary publication. It included a bit of everything, and I still would like to see more of that. I agree with Woodrow about subject matter. And actually the first book that we published, graphic book, was not Woodrow's, but Kate Evans's Funny Weather about climate change. It is, I absolutely accept that there just needs to be many more books and subjects and so on. I would argue for Gareth's work over and over again, because it's forms like that. You have to have the experimentation, you have to have that. And famously, Gareth said in one of our kind of competition, festivals that Myriad doesn't really like to make money. Well, we do like to make money, but you have to have a mix of everything, and that's what the public want to see, and we have to try and provide that. And I'd also like to, as an overview, I think that the initiative started or continued by Hannah Berry as the existing comics laureate, doing work on the Comic Creators Survey, and she's just come out with a publication which everybody should Google called Let's Fix Comics. I think that's got a lot of interesting things in it. Woodrow's ambassadorial role on the Society of Authors. There are all these institutions and so on that we need to make sure that we have a foot in and make our own as well, That's it.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you, Corinne. Thank you, everyone, for coming together today and talking about your experience as competitors, as judges, as creators, as connectors, and as publishers. I think it's fantastic. Again, as a foreigner, as someone from across the pond, having worked in comics in the U.S. and then come over here, I love how small and intimate the comic scene is, but at the same time, how diverse the output is, how the stories that people choose to tell in comics over here. It's just, I've said this before, I'll say it again, we are living in a golden age in comics in the UK. We just need to do a better job of helping people to understand that we're living in this golden age and get them to be able to celebrate and participate. Well, thank you very much, folks. Thank you for having me as your panel host, and wash your hands, observe social distance. Let's all stay healthy till the new year when we can all see each other again.